It's very appropriate, I think, that you've chosen to talk about carbon this week. This is, believe it or not, my third talk on what the malting industry needs from Regen Ag this week. So I have to remember that I've got to give you this bespoke talk, not the one that I gave yesterday to Scottish Agronomy. So why do maltsters need sustainable malt? Some of it is driven by things that we wanted to do ourselves. So as Gary said there, our board described me recently as Nostradamus because I was doing this 20 years ago before anybody asked about it, and I'm only T-minus 12 days before I move on from Muntons to follow the sustainability path that I so enjoy. If you think about it, it's not just in agriculture. I've also become the carbon advisor or one of the 6 carbon advisors for small businesses in Norfolk and Suffolk. 92% of businesses in Norfolk and Suffolk have less than 8 employees, and they don't get this stuff. If you look at the DEFRA statistics, 30% of farms are too small. They say they don't have the support to understand this stuff. So I thought, well, there's a niche there, and thankfully over COVID, taught me that I could do a lot of this from home, and it's been I get very enthusiastic about it because it's great to see the sort of scales come off people's eyes. You know, interestingly, 20 years ago, I was accused of dumbing it down, and I said, I don't dumb it down, I'm demystifying, and I think that's very different. If you tell someone it's complicated, they're going to think it's complicated, and they're not going to act. So that's very much, I think, the way we've taken it to our supply chain. So little advert for me, that's what I'm going to go off and do. I found that there's a niche in this particular area, and I suppose the name Malt Doctor means that I'm going to do most of my work in the malting sector. But what have I helped Muntons do over the past few years? Well, Muntons is 100 years old, so that's sustainable for a start. We couldn't celebrate in 21. We're going to celebrate in 22 for obvious reasons. What is it that we've done around sustainability? Well, one of the key things is that we've actually developed a science-based target. Now, the science-based target means that the emission savings that we are making are in line with that no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade rise. Now, if Muntons hits it, it doesn't mean the globe's going to be saved, of course, but it means that everybody hits it. Now, when I set that back in 2010, I thought that was quite difficult. We're actually going to achieve it this year, and I think that you'll see some of that in a little while. Scope 3 we've heard a lot about. Yes, certainly most businesses, there's Scope 3. That's the stuff that comes into you and the impact of the stuff that leaves your factory. Most people are going to be sort of 80-90% of your carbon footprint is going to be in there, so you should be interested in it. For us, it was about 67%, but we've already reduced that by 30%, and now we're looking for the next 30%. That 30% is what the industry is particularly interested in because they are beginning to develop their own agendas now for that sort of thing. I did design the world's first carbon calculator for malt back in 2006, and in 2007, at conferences I was speaking at, I was threatened with boycott for talking about this stuff. Can you believe it? Now, if you don't talk about it, they wonder why. So that's enabled Muntons to set a strategy to be net zero by 2050. So what is it that's driving this? Well, everybody now, a lot of our customers are expecting us to be part of the race to zero, and people get very angry about this, and all sorts of people will come up with different ways of achieving it. But the UK has indeed committed to net zero by 2050, and indeed 78% by 2035. So what we've done as a business is to say, well, we are a business. We are about making profit. So how do you find that model of making profit with being environmentally sensitive, but also engaging with your people? So we've used that triple bottom line model there, that there is always a way of making profit in an environmentally sensitive way. I've heard over 20 years so many boards tell me that's rubbish. They think it's all about tree hugging. Certainly when I go in as Malt Doctor, that's my first conversation with them. It is not all about tree hugging. It is about de-risking your business, making sure that you can get your raw material, that the farmers have enough money from it by you helping them with their resource use efficiency, not by putting your hand in your pocket to pay them a premium. The farmers in our farmers group, in fact, we tell them to say it quietly, but they say, we don't need a premium. I say, shh, don't say that. You are the leaders in your industry, in the farmer group. Take the premium for now and help everybody else see why they don't need it going forward in the future. So we know that we've got a legal target, don't we, in the UK? So we have no option but to carbon neutral. But how do we get there? And how did Muntons get there? Well, first of all, we did have a look at a carbon footprint calculator back in 2005, 2006. I developed my own. I wish I had a penny for every time someone told me that there's a massive difference depending on the carbon calculator and you can get any value you want. That's not true. If you choose the wrong carbon calculator, you can get any value that you want. But if you choose the one which has all the right elements, as Becky was talking this morning, you will get a very similar number. Now, what do I mean by that? Here's a couple of examples. But you notice that the top three things are still the top three things, whichever model you choose. Now, we didn't know at the time it was going to be barley growing that was going to be that much of an impact on us. However, if I look at the carbon footprint of the widest different models that I can find, they're 6% different. Now, I like flipping the figures. That means I'm 94% certain. Now, how many of you are 94% certain of anything that you do in business? I wish I was. That means that I can move on, and we've heard a number of speakers this morning talk about that. Choose your model, track your progress. Don't worry then if you've gone from, you see those two models there for barley. Is it 62? Is it 52? I don't care, because I've halved that in the time that people are still arguing over the past 20 years about whether it is 62 or 52. So I don't care. What I did care about was where it was coming from, and you've seen these sort of figures. These are very similar figures to what you've seen this morning. A lot of it came from the production of the fertiliser, and then a lot of it came from then the use when it was on the soil. Now, there's a lot happened in that. When I first put that slide up in 2006, 2007, the fertiliser manufacturers would not speak to me for 4 years when I tried to knock on their doors because they're saying, it's our fault. I said, I didn't say it was anybody's fault. I just simply said, I'd like to know what it is behind that's contributing to it. And then you look at the work that people like Yara, and there are other fertiliser manufacturers, of course, you look at what they've done back in the early or the mid-2000s. They took out 90% of the emissions from their nitric acid production at the start of the process. They developed an abated fertiliser, which was 40% better than any of their competitors. So we therefore said, as maltsters, well, if it's the same price, we will require our growers to use that fertiliser, because why wouldn't we? And they said, of course, that's fair enough. And they've now published even more widely in their roadmap. I don't mind giving them a call out. I don't work for them. I'm not on a retainer. But I do think they've done a fantastic job, and this is very much the point, that going across the supply chain, developing that roadmap, we started to talk to people that we didn't used to talk to before. We didn't engage as much with farmers. We certainly didn't talk to the fertiliser manufacturers. But this data is all uncertain, isn't it? Don't you think so? People keep telling you this. Well, take the figures that we've got. So if I'm looking at scope 1, the things that I can get my arms around, all the things that happen in my factory, 34%, now I get an invoice for that. The scope 2, the electricity I buy, I get an invoice for that. So for 40% of that calculator, straight away, I'm 100% certain what my carbon footprint is. The scope 3 upstream, I've just told you I'm 94% of that because I've got a calculator for it. So I'm 94% certain of that 60%. So it means I'm nearly 100% certain of 97% of my carbon footprint. So do I care about this other stuff, this 3%? And how do I know it's 3%? Well, what we do with air, we use a financial model. The financial model has been done by some very clever people to look at exactly how much your spend relates to your emissions. Now, I know that it's pretty good because if I use it for the raw materials, it will predict that my carbon footprint for one of our plants is 60,000 tonnes, and when I measure it by my own tool, it's 50,000 tonnes, so it's pretty close. So therefore, I trust it for the rest. So even if I was 100% out, my scope 3 emissions downstream are only going to be 6%. So move on. Don't get bogged down in that debate. And that's what we take out. There are various ways. You can have a supplier-specific method, your own calculator. You can have a financial model. Number 4 is not as good as number 1, but you put them both together and you end up at number 2, a hybrid method. I was bet £10 initially that I couldn't develop a carbon calculator that people would use in 2 weeks. At the time, the Cool Farm tool was coming out, 120 questions, which the agronomist said we can't even understand. So I did develop a model, and then 3 months later, Farmers Weekly rang me up. They said, do you realise your carbon footprint model is the 3rd most used in the UK? I said, oh, that's not bad for 10 quid. You can tell I wasn't a consultant then. It should have been 30 grand, shouldn't it? But it will be from April the 6th. But what it did there was that it demystified it for the farmers. If they put a yes in that bottom one, which you may not be able to read at the back, but it's asking if they use one of these abated nitrogen fertilizers, the low carbon ones, they would drop their carbon footprint dramatically. So we therefore specified that, and we've achieved, just with that one initiative alone, 32% lower barley carbon footprint. Not bad, eh? How did that translate to farmers? Well, for farmers, we then said, well, you know, you can go and buy yourself another tractor if you want. Cost you an absolute arm and a leg. If there's any equipment suppliers, I apologise for that comment, but it is expensive. Won't make much difference to your carbon footprint. You could use less fertiliser, not bad, precision farming, etc. You could find a variety that yields 20% more, well, good luck with that. Or you could do the last thing on here, which is to use one of those lower carbon fertilisers. Zero cost, extra cost to you, but a massive reduction in your carbon footprint. And that's what we wanted to use that model to drive. Very simple things like that. And it's dramatically worked. Now, we've got a lot more flash than that. We've been reporting our data since 2007, and we can show you what happens to scope 1, 2, and 3. We've got some pretty big reductions in there, haven't we, in those scopes? So scope 2, how have we done it? Well, we did do it by mapping, but I'm not so interested in that. That's sort of a bit esoteric, I suppose, and you can put up your scopes and all the rest of it. I'm interested in this. By taking the attitude that it doesn't matter about how certain you are, we have gone from 60,000 tonnes of emissions down to between 6,000 and 10,000 emissions in that time. If you look at our competitors, they're still up at those levels they were at in 2007. When we are now finding in the last year that customers, brewers and distillers are now switching their supply to us on the basis of our carbon footprint, because they're looking at their brands and they want to reduce the carbon footprint, and because we've got verifiable data, they're quite happy now. But it's taken them 18 years of me banging the door, talking to them about this, and suddenly they've woken up to it. How have we done it? We've done it in very practical ways. We do have a brewery as well at Muntons. So we've made electricity from an anaerobic digestion plant. We've put biomass in, which is using wood chip, not grown specifically to burn. It's waste from forestry operations within 75 kilometres of our plant. It's FSC assured, and there's enough of it for the next 30 years. All of those things were very important to us, and therefore we put one in at our Stowmarket plant, and we're also generating electricity. Now, the way we're generating that electricity is to do it through the spare gas that we don't use on site because we're creating heat with biomass. The gas is not the perfect solution, but it does provide us with electricity which is 20% less than you can get off the grid at the moment. By 2035, the grid will be better than us. But this is the whole point. Take some action now with what you can do now, and in 20 years' time, there'll be something else that will have come along. It's about taking action. So the industry does expect us to set a science-based target. 2,000 people have signed up to this, but only 42% have actually agreed a target. Well, shame on them. Why have we done it? Why does industry expect us to do it? Why do our customers expect this? 63% of company execs say it drives innovation. It did drive innovation. When I was looking at the science-based target, which said I had to say 45%, and I thought I was doing well at 18%, I remember sitting in my lounge at home for a couple of weeks thinking, how do I get there? And suddenly, light bulb moment. And you start looking at fuel, which you'd never looked at before. You are then, 35% of execs say that it's going to make you more resilient against that ever-tightening emissions target. You know, the UK target, we're leading the world, and we're going to have to get there before most other people. And 55% of execs, as I've just explained to you, you know I agree with this, it gives you greater competitive advantage. People will switch to you on the basis of this performance. They also, business now wants us to look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This broadens the definition of sustainability, and this is a flash up today. Go and have a look at our sustainability report to see that we put details behind this. What are we doing in each of those goals, the most important of which is 17, work together. We've also joined the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative platform because that defines sustainability for every crop in every geography. You have a farm sustainability assessment which you can do as a standalone, or you can benchmark it against one of the existing schemes. Red Tractor and Leaf in this country are already benchmarked as being aligned with it. You can be bronze, silver or gold. at that, so you can set a trajectory for your supply chain to improve, and you can find a gap analysis for your farmers. Munson's was the first one to be audited against that because our competitors said, yeah, Nigel talks about that stuff, but it's all rubbish. So we got audited and we're able to say then, yes, we did do it for real, and we did have 100% sustainable barley. And that now, although we did that 15 years ago, that's now part of most of the major brewers' contracts. You can't even get in there without it. This is why Heineken have got particularly interested in this. Heineken are probably one of the leaders, I would say, in trying to talk to farmers. Their famous phrase was no barley, no beer. That sort of focuses the mind, doesn't it? That's what sustainability is about. It's about drinking beer and having the barley to produce it. So we very much, they realised that they were trying to talk to farmers, and farmers were, what the heck is Heineken coming to look at my farm for? So Heineken said, well, we want to work with processors, because processors, it was a bit more acceptable for the maltster or the miller to be talking to the farmer than it was for Heineken, for example. Working with a group called Sustainable Futures, we're getting real improvements. And those improvements are largely coming around carbon farming. You know what it is. You've heard enough about it this morning, so I'm not going to dwell on that. I'll just flash this up. You know what it is. But if you look at the EU in there, they're saying that they want it to be about nutrient loss and about organic farming. I'm not a fan of pure organic farming, and I'll show you why in a minute. I don't think that's the answer, but there's a lot we can learn from it. The UK soil is being depleted at 0.6% per annum, and yet the Paris Agreement said we should be moving in the other direction and increasing it by 0.4%, and yet, as we've heard this morning, there's plenty of capacity in UK soils to increase that. We've got 250 years, probably, depends which calculation you use, before we've saturated all of that possibility. Why don't I like organic? And if you're an organic farmer, I'm not trying to knock you, I'm just saying that there are lots of limitations. So it depends. When the EU says we need to be organic, the yields are not as good, and if you can improve those, it will be great. But also, if you look at the land use, you need far more land to get the same yield off it. If you take it 5 years hence, you get way more microbial respiration in organic soil than an ordinary one. It's not the way forward, and yet the principles behind it, which is to use less resources and to improve biodiversity, is good. We've heard about forests. Forests burn, you lose your carbon, not good from an industrial perspective. So business is interested in carbon farming because it's quick. It's quicker than forests. It may, as Steve said, I'm not saying that forestry isn't the way forward, but look at these figures. 25 years before you can have a positive impact from a forest, and it's going to take, some 8 million tonnes of CO2 out. The trials that we've done with our carbon farming show that in just 70 to 90 days, you can accumulate 15 to 25 tonnes of CO2. How do we know that? Well, we actually go out and measure it. So it's not rocket science again. All those things in there are things that you can do easily as farmers. Yes, as Steve mentioned this morning, it's dramatically different depending on the amount of, the type of soil. So if you're on a sandy loam or a clay loam, you've got a huge capacity. But it's not all about carbon. If you build the soil organic matter, it makes it resistant to drought, and it also means you have less runoff because it's able to hold the water in there. But beware that you then start to plough your land where you've got a cover crop in there, because there's a massive impact, as you can see in there, of releasing just a little amount of nitrogen. However, verifiable carbon credits can be generated, and business is interested in this. The very big brewers and distillers are saying, if you can prove that you've locked carbon up in soil, they don't call it an offset then. An offset is basically planting a forest and using somebody else's good work to offset your carbon credits. Insetting is slightly different. It means you're looking within your supply chain. And if you look within your own supply chain, not only are you supporting carbon farming, you're de-risking your supply chain at the same time. So it's a better way of doing it. How do we know it's working? We measure it in great detail. So I'm just going to flash this one up. If you have a look in the Good Soil Guide, you'll see this in more detail. You can see where your farm is, the red line. The inner green ones tell you where your peer group are, so low, medium and high. And you measure a whole load of things in there. Putting this one graph up, you can't believe it, has actually got Heineken's main board to come to a farming event in Yorkshire. Would you think that graph would have that impact? And this one just blew their minds and said, wow, we didn't know you could measure all those things in soil. We're really interested in this. And they're seeing that and the previous one as brand protection, because they know that we're measuring real things. So it is a gold standard. We're following the Oxford principles for net-aligned carbon offsetting. It's capturing additional carbon, more carbon than is used in the growing process. We're not selling all of the carbon credits that are there, because if you do happen to lose some en route, you've got to replace it, so keep some in the bank so that you can put them back in the bank later, and you mustn't disturb the soil. So all of those things are important in there. So I hope that gives you an idea in a snapshot, 20 minutes there, exactly the sort of things that we're doing, and those things impress business to the point that they are prepared then to switch contracts to their supply chain who is doing real practical things and can prove it. I was very pleased that part of that led to us getting the Platinum Award as well, so I wanted to flash that up. I'm pleased with that. As I left Muntons, that was one of my key things, was to make sure that we could be proven as sustainable, so we were in the top 1% of 85,000 companies. Thanks very much.